Janice Pariat and Amitava Kumar are two of the most luminous and critically acclaimed contemporary Indian writers whose body of work challenges our understanding of home and belonging and time and space. They join journalist and critic Mandira Nayar in what promises to be a fascinating conversation. Up next.
Hello, and we are going to send this video out on World Book Day. And of course, we've got one of my favorite writers. Both of their books were incredibly inspiring. I think they were my favorite books. And I have given out Janice's book for Christmas, New Year, everything. It's the book, as I said in my review, turns you into a zealous bookseller. And Amitava's book, whether it was the blue book notebook or the yellow book notebook, I think it's a book that you have to read if you're a writer, if you're a reader. So welcome to this. We have half an hour, so I'm going to make this really short and snappy. And I wanted to really start off with at the heart of Amitava's book, where he talks really about writing. And I think both of you teach. So you're more than just writers, readers. You're also teachers. And we're hoping that, I think part of it is also to get to people who read to also learn how to write or understand writing. And I wanted to ask you, Amitava, you have this very interesting formula about writing and how many number of words that you do every day. So can you talk about that? And I think 150 words, if you have to write every 150 words if you want to be a writer.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking many years ago when I was telling my students that we had a year-long course and I had to write a book after David Devidar asked me to write about Patna. I thought 30,000 words were needed. So I said to my students, you have to write 150 words every day and you have to walk mindfully for 10 minutes each day. I am holding this little notebook.
Yeah.
If I write just one page, small handwriting, I could be in a taxi, in a train. It will be 150 words. So I really believe that a daily practice and a very modest practice allows us just to be engaged in the act of creation and to do it every day. Because, some folks think, oh, I'll write a whole book in a month or I'll write 2,000 words on a day. I'm not young like Janice also, so I just think how to pace oneself slowly and you just do. But I want to hear what is Janice's practice.
Yeah, what is Janice's practice?
Amitava, I have to admit that after I spent time with the Yellow Book and the Blue Book end of last year, this was,
Right.
We had a session at the Bangalore Lit Fest together. I was so inspired by this little visual journal that you kept that I started one of my own on the 1st of January.
Wonderful.
And I honestly owe it all to you. I loved what you said about how a moment like that of creation, whether it's writing or painting, and I'm no painter, but I try, helps you ground yourself to the day. It helps you slow down time. It helps you mark a day in that moment so that life doesn't pass you by in a blur.
It froze.
And
life froze or Janice froze?
Someone froze. My own screen was frozen.
Okay. I think you froze for a moment.
I think you
froze. I see.
But you're back now.
Oh, sorry.
So thanks to creations like the Blue Book and the Yellow Book, I've actually started incorporating that little visual detail into my daily routine. I do not write every day. I'm not that kind of a writer, but I like to create every day something or the other, something very small, a fleeting something. But I think it's been such an important practice.
Lesson. Yeah. I think and I wanted to say this as journalists, writing 150 words a day is something that we do naturally, but we never do it mindfully. You know what I mean? If you ask journalists to set up to do a target of about 150 words or 500 words, they will do that automatically because the story is such. But mindful writing, this 150 words where it's all yours or it's about you, something that touches you, something that is emotional, and or something that is, I think you described as something that you see. You had this wonderful, powerful thing about this man who falls, and you see him at the tube station, and then you go and record that. The act of daily recording, I think that's an important aspect to do. And I wanted to ask you both to respond to the fact that you created, and the blue book, for example, you start off writing in the pandemic. You just start recording aspects about the pandemic. It was a big pandemic baby in a way, as was Yellow Notebook. You talk about the aspect of the pandemic. And Janice, your book, of course, was written during the pandemic, where life, where days sort of gave you the opportunity to sort of still everyday life, but somehow it sort of also, your days became filled with endlessness. So how do you sort of create writing in that? And of course, you talked about that, you see, in that space where where everything is a blur, where it's endless. You don't know when there's uncertainty. And how do you sort of create and mark and record a day when everything almost looks like Groundhog Day, every day the same?
Janice, you go first.
I feel like you should, because in some ways, Blue Book and Yellow Book were such direct responses to the pandemic, right? So I'd actually really love to hear that first, and then I'll take off from where you leave off, if that's okay.
Sure. Of course. When I was working on the Blue Book, when I started it, I wasn't thinking it was a book. It was just a way of slowing down time, in the sense of the news about the pandemic was such an assault that just trying to, in some ways, write down what was happening that day was an important way of just gaining some urgency in the face of media onslaught. The other thing was that very early in the pandemic, I found this project because of one line that had stuck in my head from Ernest Hemingway, that write down one truthful sentence every day. I had decided that I would write one rumor every day, one lie that I was hearing about the pandemic. So that was a nice little conceit that allowed me just to get some sense of how to locate myself in the world. Now, in the second book, the Yellow Book, I had taken my students to London. And so I thought it would be, as a sequel, because I had already done the Blue Book, now I had a clearer sense of what my project was. And so I was thinking, as I was saying to my students also, every day you have to note down, you have to have a ritual that you will repeat every day. So, for example, there was one student, she wanted to note down and use an app to hear to hear bird calls. So I said, okay, every day, all you need to do is record a bird call, but it should be where you are. What does your app say? What is about that bird? How does it sound to you? There was another student who was having some mental, emotional problems. She did not want to be away from home. And I said to her, just follow one color, just note down red. Let red be the thread that stitches together your days. So these strategies were just ways of getting a handle on life passing by.
Yeah.
And Janice?
And I think for me, the pandemic was exactly as you said it was, Mandira. It was a very constrained, yet also liberating. It was still, but also transformative. And you're right, I wrote most of everything, The Light Touches, a book about journeys and travel in the stillness of the storm. But honestly, and I don't know if people talk about this much even now, I emerged from the pandemic feeling very out of time and feeling very aligned. And I honestly hadn't managed to go back to any semblance of temporal normalcy for the longest time. And I think what has really helped finally is actually keeping this small little visual diary inspired by Amitava's book.
Yes.
For all of these months this year. There's a wonderful quote by Goethe, who was a great sketcher and illustrator himself, who said that actually to draw and to paint is to find new ways of seeing, to find a new view. And I thought that was such a lovely way to go about from day to day, looking for a new view and finding a new view and finding a new way of seeing. And that has actually helped keep me, or has made me feel a little more grounded in my day, in time, in this kind of temporal landscape, which had felt so at odds, with everything after the pandemic.
I wanted to say, both your books in some way also is a response to nature. Amitava, you look outside the window, you're drawing. Janice, your book is really very much, a response to climate change. It's talking about the forest, it's talking about stories, it's talking about that. And I wanted to read I wanted to read a quote that really, it's also about journey. I wanted to read something that you wrote about spending time in the forest, right? And you say it is richer the more time you spend there, the more time you walk around, the more time you stop and see trees. And I wanted you both to respond to that. Amitava, you talk about walking in the heat for very long, this idea of, you will, if you look hard enough, you will find beauty. And this idea of nature and this grounding in your book is really about that, climate change, going back, giving back. Can you really respond to both about this and how you see it and how you bring it into everyday practice?
Yesterday I planted, the day before I planted a peach tree because I was taking pictures in a parking lot of 2 peach trees, someone had put in their truck, and a woman shouted out, she said, those are peaches. You can buy them in that store. So I went in and bought one. And then I posted it on social media saying that one day, a few years from now, my wife will sit under it and drink tea, and I might take up poetry. And someone said, one tree is not enough. You need another one for a pollination. So yesterday I went and got another tree, and I've planted it. I can see it right now in my backyard. And I was telling my wife yesterday that when our children grow up, especially my daughter, I hope, she'll be interested in how it flowers. These are, the trees that
beautiful
will flower.
Flowers. Yeah.
Yes, and I put a flowering cherry tree yesterday in the front also. So we'll see. What I'm saying is there is so much. There's a lovely line about how even if this were my last day on this planet, I would still plant a tree. So for me, somehow over these last few years, trees have become both about, I know I've been drawing and painting the same tree. It's a yellowwood tree in my backyard, but they have also become somehow a symbol of hope, something that you respect because they give us so much. I was influenced a lot by reading the Oeuvres story by Richard Powers, which won the National Book Award here. And the tree doesn't care. The tree always gives you what it needs to. And I think that should be the artist's credo, that, how to be giving gifts to the world around you because of whatever little or more talent you have. So that's how I'm thinking about trees and creativity.
And Janice?
That's so lovely. And I'm just going to take off from what Amitava said, which is to say that, as a person who enjoys gardening, as a gardener, being a gardener and planting a garden is always about the future. And it's always about the question, how might I be a good ancestor? Because Amitava is planting that peach tree not for himself, but for his daughter and for his daughter's daughter. So being a gardener is being hopeful, but also being a good ancestor. And I think for me, rather than just this kind of poetic, lyrical connection to nature that, all of us Northeastern writers seem to have been,
sort of bracketed in.
Yes, that we write about beautiful nature and mystic mountains and sparkling streams, and those are all there, not to say
of course,
not, appreciated and loved. But I think that for me, being in that space has helped turn a more inward, reflective eye towards, of course, myself, but to the world, to say, yes, I'm here in this forest, but how might I live in such a way that I ensure that this forest continues? That is not just for me, that it lives on. And what can I do? Possibly the best thing to do is to leave it alone, but we are humans and we don't leave things alone. And sometimes you have to step in and intervene and tell other humans to say, please leave things alone. Please leave forests alone. So for me, that relationship to nature has really transformed from one of sort of benign, almost romantic sort of prettiness, picturesqueness, to one of deep political engagement, of asking, how might we be better gardeners?
And you have this wonderful thing where in the book where you leave a little bit of sugar, right? Because you don't take, you also give, right? And there's an aspect of that in that. And I was just thinking, when you talk about being good ancestors and this whole thing about the peach tree, it also is. So, I mean, if you look at Palestinian poetry, for example, or Palestinian writing, the olive tree and how it's handed down is such a powerful aspect. And, we don't really look at how connected and how we look this thing. But I wanted to said engagement for more political, and I wanted to ask Amitava. You say that you talk about politics and art, and you talk about creativity, and you say politics is the elephant in the room, right? At some point of time, and I wanted to ask you, in this particular time, in times where politics does dominate our everyday. It is what we respond to, whether it's in America or it's here, where politics is sort of creeping into our everyday, and sort of in somewhere where you're more mindful. How do you look at politics, art, and how do you sort of respond to it? And Janice, you too.
I think, of course, that politics is politics is about freedom, and art is about freedom. But when you bring them together, you can certainly strengthen your politics, find a better way of saying what you wanted to say. But a part of me also thinks that freedom, an artistic freedom, means sometimes even freedom from politics, so that at some time I want to respond, for example, using my art more powerfully to, let's say, war. But I also want to use all my artistic impulses sometimes to find a space that is sometimes away from politics. I feel the gift of art sometimes is this obliqueness, that when you address something too directly or too closely, I find it a little bit stifling. So the elephant in the room image is also that there is no space left for anything else. It becomes a bit too overwhelming. And and if I think of some writers, if I think, for example, of who did I read just that last time when I was with Janice in Bangalore? I read, for example, Sakina's Kiss. It's all political. A woman's freedom, a young woman's freedom, things happening. But it is also a little bit oblique. It doesn't sound like propaganda. It's not direct. It is, and that's sort of a thing I'm trying to somewhat inarticulately get across right now. So, Janice.
Yeah, no,
Janice, climate is also politics. Political, very political.
Yes, but I think, our very existence is political, really. And for us who come from a certain part of the country, there's no choice, right? There is very little choice. When you come from the Northeast, your very existence is created by a need, to buffer the mainland from China. You're there because all of these borders have been created. Where to end really is the question, right? So I've realized this now, that, the very existence of the space where we come from is mired in politics, and we've grown up in the most blatant, obvious way in the throes of political turbulence because of curfews and buns and riots. So, there's there's very little room, as Amitava said, sometimes writer from there to write about anything else. Also, to pick up on what Amitava was saying, I also treasure a kind of obliqueness, and I also treasure the telling of a good story. For me is very, very important. And where that story can be unwrapped and unfolded into many, many interpretations, that for me is a good story. So you might actually read something that I've written. You might find calm and quiet and soothing in it, as many say. But there will be some who say, gosh, this was your most deeply political book, but it came at me in this very quiet way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have, and I think that's more powerful, which is why I think that it is very, if you don't head it, if you don't address it head on, there is another way to do it, which is a more deeply more powerful way. Okay, now I wanted to talk to you about rejection. Both of you deal with it. I think Amitava at the end of the book talks about the time, I think, a fellowship, and he talks about a season of rejection in some ways, right? And I just wanted to say, people do. I mean, do you still worry about rejection? I mean, you have this. I mean, can it be possible, and does it really hurt as much as when you were a younger writer? And Janice, you talk about rejection in the New Yorker, and then and then the book becoming the book to read. So how does rejection still happen? And does it hurt so much? Really?
Of course.
How?
I think that is the plight of the artist, no? Or the plight of being human.
Yeah.
You will always live with rejection, and you have to make your peace with that, and it never really gets much easier because it always stings, but you maybe get better at dealing with that rejection in some way, in that you sort of move on from it a little faster than you would have when you were 22. But of course, I still live with rejection, and I still get those emails which say, thank you, your work was wonderful, but. And we are so happy that you sent your work to us, and we're so honored to have seen it, but and we live with that but all the time. But maybe that's not a bad thing. That gives us perspective. It gives us also the ability to laugh about it.
Yeah.
And say, who knows how these things work? Honestly, I still feel like it's all very arbitrary, and who really knows how these networks gather to bolster one and not another.
Yeah.
And you have to negotiate this, I think, day to day, year by year. And hopefully you get wiser, but not all the time. Sometimes you throw a tantrum and you buy yourself flowers. And you say, okay, fine, whatever. They don't know what they're missing out on.
Of course they don't.
Amitava?
Yeah. Buy yourself flowers or plant a peach tree.
I do, I say to my students that if you are not getting rejected every week, you're not trying hard enough. I certainly have that experience each week. I've quoted in one of my books, which in India is sold as Writing Badly is Easy. I quote a writer who says, rejection to a writer is like fish to a water. That's all there is, One thing I would say about it is there is so much injustice in the world. Why is, let's say, you mentioned Palestine. How is a Palestinian mother in any way responsible for what's happening to her child and the bombs are falling? Our own rejections, our own sufferings are put in proper perspective there.
Yeah.
And also, Janice is quite right. It's very arbitrary. And in that sense, why should you, as a writer living in the world, be free from all the arbitrariness and injustice in the world? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, basically, it has to even out, and writers have to get their share of unfairness too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's keep things real. Yes.
Let's keep things real. So your book is also about, both of you look at journeys. Yours, of course, is at the heart of this journey that you're seeing, and all your students are given a map where they walk around and they talk to other writers, but it's also about another journey. And Janice's book is definitely about a journey. It's about a journey within journeys, and there are journeys within. And I wanted to ask you, how does travel influence? How does journeys influence you? And how do you respond to that? Because yours is also, I mean, this thing is also a journey in some ways, an immigrant journey. You talk about being an immigrant, you talk about going back to Patna, you talk about various aspects. So how does journeys work in and travel work in with this thing? How do you respond to that?
My quick response to that is that let's say if you keep an Instagram account, if you go to another city, you will see that the number of pictures you post rises, and that's because you're seeing with new eyes. And that's really the heart of, journeying. Journeys give you new eyes, and they give you new encounters. I sometimes am just baffled when my students want to write only about themselves or look inward. It's all important. But if they took a journey, if they bought a, cheap ticket and went half an hour away to another town and looked for one thing and wrote about what they found and didn't find, a conversation they had with a stranger, it is extraordinary. It is generative. It gives you life. That's how I think about journeys.
So lovely. There's a lovely quote by John Muir, who is an American essayist, who says, to go out is to go in.
Yeah.
So these are, journeys allow you to navigate all sorts of landscapes, whether those are interior landscapes or physical, geographical ones. And apart from all the lovely things that Amitava has said about journeys, which I completely agree with, I'm also really interested in how we navigate journeys as people, as characters. Like, what frustrates us? Like, what annoys us? What gives us joy? How do you respond to being placed in a position of infinite variables? You're not at home where everything is kind of arranged to suit you, to your preferences. When you're on a journey, that doesn't happen. And this is why a lot of my characters take these journeys, because I want to place them in uncomfortable positions, and I want to see how they react just as much as I want to see how I react and others around me do as well. I think it's a great stage of playing out the human drama. To notice these details tell you a lot about yourself and about other people and about your characters.
So sorry, carry on, respond to that.
I was just going to say that Janice's remark made me think how disappointing it was for me this past summer, when I went down the small towns next to the Ganga. I was just journeying down and I was thinking I would write a report. Once, when I was stuck for 16 hours on a highway because of a landslide, I was very disappointed that feeling sulky and annoyed, I did not get out and talk to anyone. And it revealed to me the limits of my own inquiring self, that I am who preaches going out into the world, but set with a certain kind of adversity, I retreated into the self. And that was a nice moment of discovery about, how limited my own insights have been so far in life.
That's true. I mean, I think also the aspect of travel writing was first also to, in some ways, not only to show you a different world, but also to show how you respond. Pico Iyer, for example, is also, one of my favorite writers, writes about travel, but it's also travel within, it's travel inward. And I think all journeys have to have that in it. So I wanted to ask you, both of you look at structure, both the books, the Blue Notebook, the Yellow Notebook, as well as Janice's book, deals with structure and different timelines, different things in a very innovative way. I mean, when you talk about in the Blue Notebook, how you were creating this, how this would actually even be structured. And I wanted to talk to you about how important is structure. I know Janice believes that it's really important. So can you talk about how obsessed you are with structure and what do you do? Does it keep you up at night?
Janice, you want to go first?
I didn't know who she meant.
Oh, I said Janice. Yes. Both of you. But I mean, I think when Janice talks about it being obsessive. Yes, sorry.
I think it could have
meant anybody.
both of us. Yes. I am slightly obsessed, if not more than slightly obsessed with structure, because I think that how and when I'm relaying information on the page, in effects and influences how you experience that particular piece of writing. And I don't mean just with fiction, I mean with every other kind of writing, even with photography, with photos, when you're working with images, how, you know, what shapes how you see the next paragraph or the next image. You know, it's shaped by what comes before and what comes after. And so I'm quite obsessive about structure because of that, and especially with something like Everything the Light Touches, which was vast and expansive. It was a much larger structural canvas to work with. It was very challenging, but infinitely intriguing and delightful. I think this is one of my you know, it's my favorite thing to do, actually, to figure out structure, to sit almost like a clockmaker's apprentice, to sort of see, to be able to unscrew the back of the watch and be able to see all the cogs and, you know, and the little wheels that kind of make the hands turn rather beautifully and seamlessly on the front. But I mean, my engagement with structure begins very, very early, which is when I ask myself at the beginning of any literary project, you know, how do I best tell this story? How do I most effectively place all of this information that I have about this story world, whatever that might be? How do I place it in a way? How do I order it in a way that would be most powerful, most effective?
And Amitava?
You know that you guys can correct me, but that E.M. Foster dictum about how if you say the king died and then the queen died, or the queen died and then the king died, that's not a story. But if you say the queen died and then the king died out of grief or from grief, then you have injected plot. Now that is one way of thinking about structure, you know, when you inject causality. But structure is actually a lot of things, and it preoccupies me too, just like it does Janice, in the sense of what do you withhold in order to make something more dramatic, or how do you find a new form in order to change what you had already offered, a picture that you had offered. You know, this lovely story that I always repeat about John Berger saying on one page, showing a painting of Van Gogh's and saying, this is, crows flying into the sunset. And then when you turn the page, it is the same painting, but now it has the words, this was the last painting that Van Gogh painted before he tried to kill himself. So that's a question about structure too, how certain words with repetition then reframe something that has been offered. All of these, and these are just 2-3 different examples, but all of these are ways to think about structure. A wonderful example I have is something which I have somewhere here on my own bookshelf, a book about bombing by Sven Lundquist. And you can open the book on any page and then start reading it, and it will have notations about which other pages it is connected to. And therefore, the history of bombing becomes a much more dynamic discovery across countries than reading it linearly from first page to the last. You know, it's infinite, this whole play of structure, but it's also very important. I think it's among perhaps the most important thing.
Okay.
So both of you are teachers, and I wanted to ask you, as writers, teaching writing, is that easy? Is that in the sense that you've talked about your students, and at some point of time, how do you find it easy? Is it more frustrating? Do you find it? Do you find that they're more receptive? Do you find you learn much more from your students?
In my case, I feel like the pressure of wanting to be a good model for my students makes me want to practice what I preach. So that has been very good. Of course, teaching takes time away from the
Writing.
other work of writing. But my search for what else to teach or what new to teach or what things to do for my students allows me just to be more alert to my own practice. So I would say on balance, it's been a good thing for me to be doing.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with Amitava, actually. And I don't know if I teach writing as much as try and create spaces for asking questions about writing and talking about writing and looking at writing closely and asking questions of our literary decisions on the page. I think that for me seems like a more useful strategy than actually teaching someone to write. I think you can't really do that, but I think you can perhaps help someone ask better questions about their writing. So in that way, it's been an incredible learning experience. We, we work closely with students' texts, especially in the more advanced courses, and I find that sitting and editing other people's writing helps me turn that same, hopefully more sharpened editorial eye towards my own writing, ask myself some of the same questions that I ask some of my students and their writing. So it's been a very collaborative kind of space where honestly I feel as though I am learning, as Amitava said, and I'm trying to do new and innovative things as well, just as much as hopefully my students feel inspired to do so. Yeah.
So it's World Book Day. So I'm going to ask you two questions. One, which was the first book you remember that was life altering, that you read and you sort of completely sunk into and realized that this is it. This is what I want to do. And then I will ask you the second question. So,
in my case, it was V.S. Naipaul's Finding the Center.
How old were you?
Sorry?
How old were you?
I would have been 21. Other books had interested me before that, but this one was a dramatic account. It is not a biographical account, but it was a story of his coming into being as a writer. And I was adrift in life and I was pretty stupid. And when I read this, I thought, oh, this is how it happens. And that was wonderful for me.
Janice?
Mine would have to be The God of Small Things.
Yeah.
I was in school when the book was first published, and I remember at the end of every school year, we'd have a little, Founders Day, those kind of events where parents would come and look very proudly at your artwork and all that, that you would display.
Yeah.
Alongside these Founders Day events, they would have these bookstores that were set up because they knew that, if your parents, we would
buy books.
We would buy books and parents would never say no to something like that. And I picked up Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, and I thought, oh, what is this book? It looks really pretty. And, I took it home and I read it over the summer holidays, and I was still quite young, and I didn't quite understand most of the book because I was still too young to read it, I think. But I do remember the language, and I do remember being struck by something, by this sense that language can be this malleable and it can be this way on the page. And I'd never read anything like it, especially because, most of my childhood reading was extremely Eurocentric. I read a lot of Enid Blytons and Nancy Drews and Agatha Christie's and, the stuff of basically, yes, the stuff of our childhood that came straight from
a different time. Yeah.
And this is the first book that turned that around for me. And I haven't really revisited the book. So it's not a book that, I go to now. But I remember then being struck was in those pages. Yeah.
And also the structure, Janice, because you emphasized it. The structure of the storytelling there is so remarkably virtuosic. That must have also made an impact on you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So inspired to revisit.
No, I mean, there's certain books like, right? They say that if where were you, you'll always remember where you were when a certain event happened, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I was in what happened when 84, when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, 9/11. You remember graphically, even though I was very small when 84.
Yeah.
But but there are certain books. There's certain books that are, when the world where the world really stops.
It shifts.
Where you just shifts, and you know that it's very powerful. So now I wanted to ask you, and I want to end with this.
Yeah.
Hanging on to hope. Okay. Hanging on to hope. Okay. That's at the heart. I mean, planting peach trees is hope in one way. I think that one day, actually, hope will be planting a mango tree in this thing and changing the whole world around. I think that, finally, the Indian arm is the conquer this thing. Of course, whether it will grow or not, but I think there is that aspect of turning, you know, you've talked about colonialism, about how we grew up in this Eurocentric white sort of thing, but it populating all of that with arm trees in a way. But so how do you hang on to hope?
When one thinks about climate change, there is very little hope. I'm sorry, Janice, did I interrupt you?
No.
Okay.
I was thinking, gosh, how do I hang on to hope?
Yeah. I mean, there is a part of me that actually thinks just being aware of one's despair and making a note of it is hanging on to hope. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just a record of the days. I mean, there's a book called A Woman in Berlin. We don't know her name. She was published as anonymous. It's full of despair and darkness. But the act itself, in retrospect at least, seems a remarkable expression of, if not hope, then resilience. And that is something hopeful, to think that in the face of deprivation, in the face of certain kind of violence, how someone still preserves a wonderful sense of humanity. But I have to confess that when I think about climate change, I think it is even wrong to have any hope because of the ways in which humanity has been behaving and how our policies are. There is no hope. There is no way in which we can turn this back. And all we have to do is earn a few more years of stability so that people do not suffer more. So that's my rather depressing response to hope.
Deeply. Janice, I'm hoping you're going to have a little, slightly more
cheerful.
End on.
Slightly more cheerful. Wanting us to live for a little longer.
I think, as Amitava said, it's difficult. It's very tricky. But I was reading this book by Robert Macfarlane. It's the book that was most recently published, Underlands, A Deep Time Journey. And it's a book that looks at our subterranean world and how we actually imagine life to be so much above ground. But life is so much also underground, right? And he said that, he wrote this book thinking that actually it would be the most unpeopled of his books. The book that was least about life. Actually, he found that it was the book that was most about life.
Right? The Moss book, right?
Yeah, the Underlands.
Where he looks,
And I thought that maybe is how hope also functions, that it maybe catches us by surprise and in the most unexpected ways and in the most unexpected places. And I think I hold on to that. I hold on to that hope of being surprised by an action, by a gesture, by a word that comes my way and makes me feel as though, yes, we have hope.
We have hope. Thank you so much.